Chinedu and Adaobi were the couple everyone in their Lekki neighborhood pointed to whenever the word blessed was mentioned. Chinedu had risen from a struggling young graduate hustling in Lagos traffic to a branch manager in one of Nigeria's biggest banks, and his success story was the pride of many who knew him. He owned a mansion with gleaming marble floors, drove a black G-Wagon, and ensured that Adaobi, his beautiful wife, always appeared radiant in elegant outfits. To the church congregation, they were proof that God answers prayers. To family members, they were the golden pair everyone envied. But what neighbors could not see was the subtle cracks beneath the surface. The way Chinedu's eyes lingered too long on other women, the way he sometimes came home late with alcohol on his breath, and the way Adaobi, though always smiling, sometimes swallowed her tears alone at night. Adaobi had sacrificed more than anyone realized to build the life they now lived. She was the one who had stayed up with him when he studied for endless exams, who lent him her meager salary when he was broke and unemployed, who prayed and fasted when opportunities seemed out of reach. Even now, she kept the home spotless, cooked his favorite meals, and managed their finances with care. But recently, she noticed small shifts. Chinedu had started dressing more sharply than usual, wearing perfume she didn't buy, and suddenly, his phone was always locked. Sometimes he laughed too loudly at text messages. Other times he became irritated when she asked simple questions. Adaobi felt a chill in her heart, but convinced herself it was stress from work. She clung to hope that the man she loved would not betray the vows they exchanged before God and family. Chinedu, however, was already entertaining dangerous thoughts. The wealth, the admiration, the respect, none of it seemed enough for him anymore. He felt restless, as though life was passing him by. The attention Adaobi gave him, while steady and loyal, no longer thrilled him. He began seeking validation elsewhere, craving excitement beyond the walls of his own home. When he received an invitation to a corporate networking event, he dressed in his finest Italian suit, not knowing that his footsteps that evening would lead him into the arms of a woman who would change his destiny forever. The event was held at the Eco Hotel's ballroom, a glittering sea of chandeliers and glass, filled with wealthy businessmen and young, ambitious women looking for connections. Chinedu, glass of champagne in hand, was introduced to Cynthia by a colleague who thought nothing of it. But for Cynthia, that introduction was all she needed. She was in her mid-20s, strikingly beautiful, with caramel skin, carefully styled wigs, and an expensive perfume that clung to her every movement. She laughed at Chinedu's jokes, touched his arm just enough to stir his ego, and told him he looked too young and handsome to already be a bank manager. Flattery poured from her lips like sweet wine, and Chinedu, drunk on her attention, felt like a teenager rediscovering romance. Adaobi had wanted to attend the event with him, but Chinedu had told her it was strictly business. Now, he felt no guilt as he leaned closer to Cynthia, intoxicated by her charm. She asked about his dreams, his ambitions, the things he still wanted to accomplish. She didn't see him as just another husband or manager. At least, that's what she made him believe. She painted him as a man destined for more, a man too powerful to remain boxed in by routine. For the first time in years, Chinedu felt truly admired not for what he had achieved, but for what he could still become. Cynthia knew exactly which buttons to press, and Chinedu was too blinded by desire to see the trap being laid. As the night ended, Cynthia gave him her number, slipping the card into his palm with a wink. "Call me if you ever want to talk outside the noise of business," she whispered. That line played on repeat in his head as he drove home to Adaobi, who was asleep waiting for him. He looked at his wife, her hair wrapped in a scarf, her face calm in slumber, and though he kissed her forehead, he felt strangely empty. His heart had already taken a dangerous detour, and Adaobi had no idea the battle she was about to fight with a woman she had never met. Chinedu wasted no time in calling Cynthia. At first, their conversation seemed harmless, playful texts during his lunch breaks, late-night calls disguised as urgent business. Cynthia always made him laugh, always knew how to make him feel like the most important man alive. But soon, the harmlessness disappeared. He began meeting her for coffee, then dinners, then weekends away under the pretense of work trips. Cynthia never asked too many questions about Adaobi, and Chinedu never offered explanations. He was too consumed by the thrill of secrecy and the intoxicating validation of a younger woman's attention. Adaobi noticed the difference. Her husband, once content to spend evenings with her watching Nollywood movies and discussing the future, now often came home past midnight. He claimed he was working on a big deal, but his cologne sometimes smelled different, and once she found a lipstick stain on his shirt. When she confronted him, he brushed it off with irritation, claiming she was paranoid and ungrateful. Adaobi swallowed her suspicions, but inside, her heart bled. She prayed harder, fasted longer, and hoped God would restore her husband's love. Yet even in prayer, she felt an invisible wall between them, a wall built brick by lies she didn't yet know the full weight of. Cynthia, on the other hand, was strategic. She began planting seeds about business opportunities, speaking of her friends abroad, who were bringing in high profits from importation. She spoke with confidence, showing Chinedu fabricated documents and testimonies. She told him, "You're too smart to stay in one place. You should be investing, multiplying your wealth. Don't you want to be more than just a banker?" Each word was a hook, and Chinedu, hungry for more, was the perfect fish to swallow it. Chinedu's obsession with Cynthia grew. Every lie he told Adaobi was matched with a deeper entanglement in Cynthia's world. She had a way of making him feel like she couldn't breathe without him, calling him her king, and promising him futures filled with unimaginable wealth and power. She showed him pictures of cars, houses, and lands that she claimed were owned by men who had trusted her ventures. Chinedu, blinded by lust and greed, began to see Adaobi as too simple, failing to realize that the woman who truly loved him was the one keeping his life steady. At home, Adaobi felt more abandoned than ever. She noticed his sudden interest in foreign accounts, his growing secrecy with documents, and the way he shielded his phone even in the middle of the night. When she asked questions, Chinedu snapped at her, accusing her of being insecure and lacking vision. His words pierced her heart like knives, but she kept quiet, hoping the man she married was still somewhere inside the stranger he had become. She began to feel like an outsider in her own home, a woman displaced by shadows she couldn't name. Cynthia knew she had him completely hooked. One evening, she whispered seductively, "If you trust me, invest big. I can turn your millions into billions. Don't you want to retire young? Don't you want Adaobi to live like a queen?" She used Adaobi's name to mask her true intentions, and Chinedu, wanting to believe he was securing a brighter future, made his first major transfer. What he didn't know was that the moment he pressed send, he wasn't funding a business. He was fueling the biggest betrayal of his life. Adaobi's instincts screamed louder with each passing day. She noticed the missing money in their joint account and the unexplained withdrawals from the savings they had built together for years. When she gently questioned him, Chinedu lashed out, accusing her of not trusting him. She cried in her mother-in-law's arms, confessing her fears that her husband was slipping away. Mama Chinedu advised her to be patient, to pray harder, to keep her home intact. Adaobi obeyed, but inside, her heart was cracking in silence. At night, when Chinedu pretended to be asleep, Adaobi sat up in bed and stared at the ceiling. She remembered their humble beginnings, the days when they couldn't afford rent, when they shared a single plate of rice, when she gave him her last salary so he could chase his banking dream. Now that they had everything, why did it feel like she was losing him? She clung to memories of the man who once held her hands and promised, "I'll never let you cry." But the man beside her now was a stranger, someone who seemed to belong to another woman, another world. She had no idea that her worst fears were not only true, but worse than she imagined. For while she prayed for her husband's heart, he was already falling deeper into Cynthia's web, and soon the betrayal would explode in ways Adaobi could never have prepared for. Chinedu had always thought of himself as a smart man, but Cynthia's honeyed words made him feel like a genius discovering new ground. She came with glossy brochures, stamped papers, and fabricated testimonies that looked so real he didn't doubt them for a second. "It's just beginning," she whispered over dinner at a quiet restaurant, her hand stroking his palm while her eyes gleamed with false sincerity. That night, he transferred 10 million naira to her importation company, convincing himself he was taking a bold step into a future where his wealth would multiply beyond imagination. Adaobi, meanwhile, had no clue what her husband was doing. She only noticed his distracted smiles and distant behavior when he returned home, as if his thoughts were elsewhere, chained to another world that didn't include her. The next morning, Chinedu strutted into his office with renewed confidence. He felt ahead of the curve, like a man who had unlocked a secret the rest of his colleagues could only dream of. Cynthia sent him a text. "My king, you're different from the rest. You're special." Those words lit him up more than any corporate award or bank recognition could ever do. He was intoxicated, not only by her beauty, but by the way she made him feel indispensable. Adaobi noticed him humming songs she hadn't heard him sing in years, and while she was hopeful that it was happiness returning, the truth was far from that. Her husband's joy was rooted in lies and betrayal that were slowly burning their home down from within. Days turned into weeks, and Cynthia fed him just enough information to keep his hopes alive. She spoke of shipments arriving soon, of foreign partners eager to expand, of money that was already working for him. When he asked about returns, she smiled and said, "Patience, my king. Greatness takes time." And like a man bewitched, he believed every word, unaware that what he had handed her was not an investment, but a sacrifice at the altar of deceit. By the second month, Chinedu was addicted to the idea of doubling his wealth. Cynthia cleverly introduced new opportunities, dangling them like candy before a child who couldn't resist. 10 million is good, she said with a playful pout, but think of what 20 or 30 can do. Imagine retiring in 5 years instead of 20. Her words sliced straight through Chinedu's sense of logic, and without blinking, he wired another 20 million into her account. This time, the sum was so heavy that Adaobi's suspicions began to grow. She noticed large withdrawals from their joint savings account, the very account they had built together for their dream of expanding into real estate. When she confronted him, Chinedu raised his voice for the first time in years, accusing her of not trusting him and of being small-minded. The venom in his words broke her spirit, and she wept silently, wondering when her husband had become a man she no longer recognized. At work, Chinedu's colleagues began to notice changes too. He was distracted during meetings, often texting on his phone under the table. He smiled at messages that made no sense to anyone but him. When asked about his sudden glow, he shrugged it off with vague comments about private deals. In reality, he was sinking deeper into Cynthia's quicksand, blinded by her calculated affection. She treated him like a king, cooking for him, calling him Odogwu, and pretending to hang on his every word. What Adaobi provided with loyalty and love, Cynthia mimicked with manipulation and lust. And to Chinedu, the counterfeit version felt more exciting. Meanwhile, Adaobi prayed harder. She spent nights kneeling at her bedside, asking God to restore her husband's heart and blind him to temptation. She confided in Mama Chinedu, who urged her to stay calm and be patient with men. They sometimes lose their way. But Adaobi's instincts screamed that something much darker was happening. The home that once felt warm and safe was now full of shadows, and though she couldn't prove it, she knew Chinedu was gambling with more than just money. He was gambling with their marriage. The lies became a routine. Every evening, Chinedu rehearsed excuses before he walked through the door. Board meetings that didn't exist, clients who had urgent demands, traffic delays that explained why he came home after midnight. Adaobi listened, her eyes searching his face, her heart sinking lower each time. She wanted to believe him, but the evidence piled up. The missing funds, the perfume on his clothes, the sudden secrecy with his phone. When she dared to ask questions, his temper flared like fire. "Why can't you just trust me?" he shouted one night. "You think everything is about cheating or money. Maybe you're the problem." His words pierced her like daggers, leaving her trembling as he stormed off to their bedroom. Adaobi sat on the living room couch, tears streaming down her face. She remembered the days when Chinedu couldn't sleep without wrapping his arms around her, when he used to say she was his peace in a chaotic world. Now, she felt like an intruder in her own home. She started losing weight, unable to eat from worry, her once bright eyes dimming with sorrow. But even in her pain, she tried to hide the cracks from outsiders. Neighbors still saw her in beautiful wrappers and gelly on Sundays, still admired how radiant she looked. None of them knew she was dying silently inside, married to a man who had placed his trust in a stranger. Chinedu, on the other hand, was already fully consumed by Cynthia's dream world. She painted pictures of houses in Dubai, vacations in the Maldives, and private jets that could soon be his. "Think bigger," she whispered. "You're not like the rest." Each time she said it, his ego ballooned, and each time Adaobi begged him to slow down. He dismissed her as backward. The wife who once carried his burdens was now seen as an obstacle, while the mistress who sought to destroy him was praised as his vision partner. The collapse came suddenly, like a thunderclap in a clear sky. One morning, Chinedu woke up to find Cynthia's line unreachable. At first he thought it was a network issue, but hours turned into a day, and a day into two. He rushed to her apartment in Victoria Island, his chest pounding with fear, only to find the flat empty. The neighbors told him she had moved out the week before with foreigners, who came to pick her up in luxury cars. Panic seized him. He called mutual contacts she had introduced him to, but their numbers were switched off. It dawned on him with the force of a sledgehammer. He had been scammed. The reality hit harder than any punch. 30 million naira, his life savings, the funds he had secretly siphoned from both family accounts and office deals, was gone. Worse, the shame of it consumed him. How could he admit he, a banker with years of experience, had fallen for such a trap? He couldn't tell his colleagues, couldn't tell his wife, couldn't tell anyone. Pride burned hotter than his desperation. He drank heavily that night, downing bottle after bottle, trying to drown the image of Cynthia's mocking smile and the sound of her voice whispering, "Trust me." Every moment of affection, every promise she made, echoed in his ears like laughter at his foolishness. When he staggered home past midnight, Adaobi rushed to him, alarmed by his bloodshot eyes and trembling hands. "Chinedu, what is it? Talk to me," she begged, holding his arm. But instead of confiding in her, the weight of shame, anger, and betrayal boiled over into rage. He yanked his arm away, glaring at her as though she were the cause of his downfall. His chest heaved, his fists clenched, and for the first time in his life, he looked at Adaobi not with love, but with dangerous fury. It happened in a blur. Adaobi reached out again, tears in her eyes, begging him to explain. Chinedu, his pride shredded and his spirit poisoned by Cynthia's betrayal, snapped. With one swift motion, he slapped her across the face, so hard she stumbled against the wall. The sound echoed through the room, silencing everything. Adaobi stood frozen, her cheek burning, her soul shattering. She stared at him, wide-eyed, unable to comprehend that the man she had loved, the man she had sacrificed everything for, had just raised his hand against her. The betrayal cut deeper than any financial loss ever could. Chinedu collapsed onto the couch, breathing heavily, his mind racing between anger and despair. He hated himself in that moment, but he hated Adaobi more, because she was a mirror reflecting his failure. He wanted someone to blame, someone weaker than him, someone who couldn't expose his foolishness to the world. He buried his face in his palms, muttering curses at Cynthia, at life, at fate. Meanwhile, Adaobi quietly walked to the bedroom, locked the door, and broke down in sobs. She clutched her chest, asking God why she was being punished, why the husband she prayed for had turned into her tormentor. That night marked a turning point. Their marriage, once the envy of many, now lay in ruins. Adaobi's love was cracked, her trust shattered, and Chinedu's pride was bleeding. What he didn't know, however, was that the very slap meant to silence her would soon open the door to his greatest undoing. For Adaobi's pain would not remain hidden forever, and when truth surfaced, it would drown him completely. Adaobi wore a scarf the next morning, not for fashion, but to hide the swelling on her face. She forced a smile as she served Chinedu breakfast, but her hands trembled as she placed the tray before him. He didn't look at her. Shame and pride made his eyes restless. In the silence between them, an entire marriage lay bleeding. Adaobi's heart screamed with questions. Why had he hit her? Why had he changed? Why was he treating her as an enemy instead of a partner? But she swallowed her words, too afraid of another outburst, too broken to push for answers. She spent the day in their bedroom, crying into her pillow, replaying memories of their courtship, when Chinedu used to say she was his world. The man before her now felt like a stranger wearing her husband's face. To neighbors, Adaobi kept up appearances. She greeted warmly, attended choir rehearsals, and even managed small laughter with friends. But behind closed doors, she was crumbling. Nights were the hardest. Lying beside Chinedu, she could hear him tossing, muttering, sometimes shouting Cynthia's name in his drunken sleep. It was like sharing a bed with a ghost. His body was there, but his soul was absent, trapped in regrets and shame he refused to share. Adaobi reached for him once, placing her hand on his arm, only for him to shrug her off and turn away. That rejection broke her more than the slap had. She began to question her worth. Had she failed as a wife? Was God punishing her? She thought about leaving, but couldn't bear the shame of divorce in their culture, nor the idea of starting over after giving him her youth, her body, her sacrifices. She prayed silently, "Lord, please return my husband to me." What she didn't realize was that God was answering in a different way, by preparing someone close to her to uncover the secrets Chinedu had tried to bury. Emeka, Adaobi's younger brother, was a sharp-eyed detective known in Lagos for chasing down fraudsters and uncovering syndicates that preyed on the wealthy. When he visited his sister one weekend, he immediately sensed something was wrong. Adaobi's smile was forced, her eyes dim, her movements stiff, as though she was hiding pain. Emeka noticed the slight bruise on her cheek under the scarf, but he didn't push immediately. Instead, he observed silently, filing details in his mind the way detectives do. Chinedu greeted him politely, but there was tension in his tone, as if he resented the presence of a man who might see what Adaobi couldn't hide. That evening, as Adaobi served dinner, Emeka gently asked, "Sis, are you okay? You don't look well." Her hands froze mid-air, and her eyes welled with tears. She tried to blink away. "I'm fine," she whispered, but Emeka knew she was lying. Later that night, when Chinedu left the house to see a client, Emeka pressed harder. With tears streaming down her face, Adaobi admitted, "He hit me." She didn't explain why, too ashamed to confess the full story. But that was enough for Emeka. His protective instincts roared to life. No one, least of all his brother-in-law, had the right to harm his sister. Coincidentally, Emeka was already leading a case involving a ring of high-level scams draining millions from unsuspecting men in Lagos. One of the names on his files was Cynthia Ibe. When he saw the name, something in his gut tightened. He didn't yet know the connection, but his instincts told him this woman and his brother-in-law might be tangled in ways Adaobi herself didn't realize. He promised Adaobi softly, "Don't worry, I'll get to the bottom of this." Back at the police office, Emeka pulled out files, transaction records, and testimonies. Cynthia's name appeared over and over, linked to fake businesses, empty apartments, and men too ashamed to report being duped. Then, while cross-checking bank transfers, Emeka froze. A familiar name appeared, Chinedu Okeke. The sums were large, tens of millions, wired into Cynthia's accounts over the past months. Shock coursed through him. His brother-in-law, the man married to his sister, was not only cheating, but had become one of the victims, fueling Cynthia's scam empire. Suddenly, Adaobi's sorrow, the bruise on her cheek, the strange distance, all of it clicked into place. Emeka's first reaction was anger. He wanted to storm into Chinedu's office and drag him out in handcuffs. But then he thought of Adaobi. His sister needed protection, not more humiliation. He knew if the truth exploded recklessly, it could destroy her socially as well. So he chose a careful path. He would gather enough evidence to trap both Cynthia and Chinedu, ensuring Adaobi was shielded, but justice was served. He called in favors, requested surveillance, and quietly put Cynthia under close watch. As the pieces fell together, Emeka felt a mix of disgust and pity. How could Chinedu, a banker with years of experience, fall so easily for such a con? And worse, how could he take out his frustration on the woman who had done nothing but love him. Emeka resolved that when the time was right, he would reveal everything to Adaobi, not to break her further, but to give her the power of truth. The day Emeka decided to tell Adaobi the full story was heavy with silence. He arrived at her home with a file tucked under his arm, his face grim. "Adaobi," he said softly, "you need to know what's really happening." He spread out the documents on the dining table, bank statements, photos of Cynthia, and reports linking Chinedu's name to fraudulent transfers. Adaobi's hands shook as she flipped through the pages, her lips quivering as tears fell freely. Each line was a knife cutting into her heart. It wasn't just infidelity. It wasn't just lies. It was betrayal at the deepest level. Her husband had gambled their lives, their savings, and their marriage on another woman who had played him for a fool. At first, she refused to believe it. "No, this can't be Chinedu," she whispered, clutching her head. "He wouldn't risk everything like this." But the evidence was undeniable. Her husband's name, his signatures, the account numbers, they were all there, mocking her with brutal clarity. The slap he gave her suddenly made sense. He hadn't struck her because of love lost, but because she reminded him of his failure, his shame, his weakness. He had turned her into a punching bag for sins she never committed. Adaobi's heart broke in ways words could not explain. She sat there, staring at the papers, feeling her chest tighten, as if the weight of betrayal might suffocate her. But beneath the heartbreak, something else stirred. Resolve. For years, she had been the quiet, forgiving wife, the woman who prayed and endured. But now, faced with undeniable truth, she realized silence would only bury her deeper in pain. She lifted her head, her eyes glistening with both tears and fire. "I will not cover for him any more," she whispered. For the first time, she chose herself. That night, Adaobi lay awake beside Chinedu, who snored heavily, reeking of alcohol. She stared at the ceiling, her mind replaying Emeka's words and the documents she had seen. Every sacrifice she had made for this marriage flashed before her, giving him her last salary, supporting him through exams, standing by him when he had nothing. And this was her reward? A husband who betrayed her with a mistress, and then struck her when life punished him for his own foolishness? Rage and sorrow battled within her, but out of the chaos, clarity was born. She would not let her life be defined by his sins. She remembered Emeka's promise, "I'll protect you, but you must stand with me." For the first time, Adaobi felt a strange power in her hands. She could choose silence and remain a victim, or she could choose truth and reclaim her dignity. She chose the latter. At dawn, she called Emeka and said in a voice that shook but didn't break, "Do whatever you must. I will not shield him." It was a decision that shattered years of loyalty, but planted the seed of freedom. When Chinedu woke, he had no idea his world was already collapsing around him. He stretched, yawned, and barked orders for breakfast, as though nothing had happened. Adaobi quietly obeyed, her face calm, her heart armored with resolve. She served him his meal, but behind her silence was a storm brewing. In that moment, she was no longer the broken woman he thought he had crushed. She was the wife who had turned into his greatest undoing. Emeka's team worked quietly but efficiently. Using phone records, bank trails, and surveillance cameras, they tracked Cynthia's movements across Lagos. She was clever, switching apartments often, using fake names, and even disguising herself, but the net was closing in. Adaobi, though still in pain, helped her brother in small ways. She handed over files Chinedu carelessly left at home, receipts of transfers she found hidden in drawers, and notes of the calls she overheard. Each piece of evidence strengthened the case, and Emeka marveled at his sister's courage. It was as though Adaobi, once silent and submissive, had transformed into a woman determined to reclaim her life, even if it meant exposing the father of her children. Meanwhile, Chinedu grew more restless. His phone buzzed with calls from creditors, and whispers at the bank hinted that something wasn't right with his accounts. He drowned himself in alcohol, slamming doors, shouting at Adaobi, blaming everyone but himself. Yet beneath his rage was fear, fear of discovery, fear of ruin, fear of what would happen if his secrets spilled into the open. He didn't know that every move he made was already under surveillance, that his downfall was no longer a matter of if, but when. At night, Adaobi would sit by the window, staring at the city lights. She no longer prayed for her marriage to be restored. Those prayers had burned out like dying candles. Instead, she prayed for strength, for justice, for the courage to stand firm when the storm broke. Deep down, she knew the day was near when the mask would fall off completely and everyone would see Chinedu for who he had become. The arrest came like thunder. On a humid Thursday afternoon, Cynthia was intercepted at Murtala Muhammad International Airport as she attempted to board a flight to Dubai under a false identity. Emeka himself was present, watching as the once glamorous siren was dragged away in handcuffs, her wig askew, her face twisted with fury. She screamed, cursed, and fought, but the evidence was overwhelming. When questioned, she tried to deflect blame, dropping Chinedu's name repeatedly. He knew. He was part of it. He gave me the money willingly. The more she spoke, the deeper Chinedu's name sank into the pit of scandal. News spread like wildfire. Within hours, social media carried the headlines. Bank manager entangled in Mistress fraud scheme. Neighbors whispered, colleagues gossiped, church members shook their heads. Adaobi read the headlines with tears in her eyes, not tears of shame, but tears of release. The truth was out, and for once, it was not she who bore the blame. For years, she had protected Chinedu's image, shielded him from gossip, and endured in silence. Now, fate had exposed him, without her lifting a finger. Cynthia, in her rage, tried to paint herself as a victim too, claiming she had only done what Chinedu pushed her into. But her lies fell apart under interrogation. With evidence stacked against her, she faced a long jail sentence. Yet in her destruction, she dragged Chinedu down with her, ensuring that his name, his career, and his dignity would never recover. Chinedu's humiliation was complete when police cars pulled up outside his mansion in full view of neighbors. Officers marched into his compound, and Emeka, cold and professional, stepped forward with a warrant. Mr. Chinedu Okeke, you are under arrest for aiding fraud through reckless transfers and failure to report criminal activity. Chinedu's knees buckled as his neighbors peered from their balconies, murmuring in shock. The same man who once boasted of wealth and power now stood handcuffed, his head bowed, his pride crushed into dust. At the bank, the scandal was catastrophic. Colleagues who once envied his success now avoided his name like a curse. Clients withdrew accounts, the board suspended him indefinitely, and whispers spread that he might face prison time. The shame was unbearable. Chinedu sat in the interrogation room, his eyes bloodshot, muttering that Cynthia had tricked him. But no one cared for excuses. He was a man undone by his own greed and lust. For Adaobi, it was bittersweet. Watching him led away in handcuffs hurt. For once upon a time, she had loved him with every fiber of her being. But it also healed something in her. She was no longer the woman cowering under his rage or the wife silenced by his slap. Now, she was a witness to his fall, and deep inside she knew justice was finally being served, not by her hands, but by fate itself. When Chinedu was released on bail and returned home briefly, he tried to plead with Adaobi. Ada, please forgive me. I was misled. I can change. His voice cracked, his eyes watery, his pride finally stripped away. For the first time, Adaobi looked at him without trembling. She saw not the husband she once adored, but a broken man brought low by his own sins. She listened in silence as he begged, his hands clutching hers desperately. Once, such pleas would have melted her heart, but now they fell on stone. Adaobi spoke softly but firmly, her voice steady like never before. I stood by you when you had nothing. I prayed for you when you had no strength. I gave you my youth, my sacrifices, and my loyalty. And when life punished you for your greed, you struck me instead of seeking my help. I cannot carry your shame anymore, Chinedu. Her words pierced him deeper than any slap, leaving him speechless. In that moment, he realized he had lost more than money, more than reputation. He had lost the one person who truly loved him. For Adaobi, speaking those words was liberation. She no longer felt the weight of guilt or obligation. She no longer saw herself as the victim of his betrayal. Instead, she stood tall as a woman who had survived lies, violence, and humiliation, and come out stronger. She didn't scream, didn't curse. Her quiet dignity was louder than any noise Chinedu could make. The end came not with a dramatic explosion, but with a slow unraveling of everything Chinedu once held dear. His bank terminated his contract, his friends distanced themselves, and his mother wept in disappointment at the man he had become. Cynthia faced years behind bars, but her betrayal lived on in his ruined life. He moved out of the mansion, unable to bear the stares of neighbors who once admired him. The G-Wagon was repossessed, the house put up for sale, and the man who once dined with elites now sat alone in cheap bars, drowning in regret. Adaobi, meanwhile, began to rebuild. She leaned on Emeka's support, surrounded herself with family, and started her own small business using savings she had carefully hidden away. For the first time in years, she smiled freely, not because her pain had disappeared, but because she had chosen herself. She wore her scars like armor, proof that betrayal could wound but not destroy. Women in the community began to see her as a symbol of strength, a reminder that silence in the face of violence and deceit was not the only option. The story ended with Adaobi walking out of court after Cynthia's final sentencing, the sun shining on her face. She looked ahead with calm resolve, knowing her journey was far from over, but no longer tied to the weight of a cheating, violent husband. Chinedu, on the other hand, sat in the shadows of his own downfall, realizing too late that the wife he struck in anger had become the very woman fate used to bring him down. His mistress had scammed him, his pride had destroyed him, but his greatest punishment was losing Adaobi forever. Please like, share, and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching to the end. Don't forget to come back for the next amazing tale yet.